Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Quitcast. My name is Becca Syme. If you have been listening for any amount of time, you know that we did an episode about 2 months ago about the right to market phrase, I guess, where we were questioning the premise of writing to market. And I came down definitively on most people should not write to market. And I promised that we would do the opposite episode where we said, you know what, never mind, most people should write to market. So we're going to question the premise of you should not write to market. And QTPing around here means that we got to deconstruct what everything is about. And so because we had Nat Connors on our Patreon in December, I think it was, talking about writing to market as a target, right, versus writing to market as a neighborhood concept. Many of you who attended that will already be familiar with Nat, but if you're not familiar, Nat, can you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about who you are?
Kia ora, Becca. My name's Nat Connors, and thank you very much, Becca, for having me on again. This is a great subject to talk about, and I know we've already had a lot of fun on the Patreon already. So I am a romantic comedy author and a retired dance teacher and a former cancer researcher, and I've been writing self-published mostly since about 2016, 2017 or so. And for the last 4 years, I have also run a little business called Kindletrends, which is a data-driven newsletter for fiction authors. So we've talked about this a little bit on the Patreon. You sign up, and every week or every month, I send you a newsletter for your genre, talking about what's going on and giving you lots of links and interpretation about what we can see in the market.
So when we had our Patreon call where we were discussing about the concept of the market exists as a neighborhood, Nat made a particular comment about the phrase right to market. And very specifically, this was when I was like, you need to come on the Quitcast when we do this second episode so that we can talk about this. Because when I say right to market, I mean something very specific. And I think I mean the thing that we mean more generally in the industry, which we're going to talk about in a second. But Nat brought up a really important point, which is that there are multiple different ways that we could possibly mean right to market, quote unquote. Do you want to talk about those?
So when we say right to market, we can mean a bunch of different things. The first and most obvious of them is the practice of intentionally shaping our story to a greater or lesser degree based on what we are already seeing in the market, either supply in the sense of other books that are being published, or demand in the sense of what readers are saying. Now, this was the topic, Becca, that you talked about in your previous Right to Market episode. And in that episode, you went into detail about the specific skill sets that were needed to be able to do that successfully. But I think what I'm saying here is that this isn't all of right to market. There are specific skills about shaping your story. That's one thing. But there are other things implicit in the term right to market. And so we've talked a bit about unpacking the term right to market and looking at each of the bits and saying, what is this part? What's this part? Do we need, which of these skills do we need? And what does it mean for us to right to market or to be aware of the market? And how much of this do we absolutely need to do? Because some of what we were talking about earlier, which I think is really interesting, is adopting a healthy attitude towards the market, having a healthy relationship with the market. And by healthy, I mean one that works for us in the sense of achieving our author goals, but also one that leaves us happy and feeling physically and mentally well. So the other things that I think are implicit in the term right to market are what we might call market awareness. And by market awareness, I mean the ability to communicate what it is that you're writing to those readers who will enjoy it. And that comes in a bunch of different ways. It comes through your marketing, through the way that you structure your cover and the way you write your blurb and so forth. But it's also a bit about what you're seeing in the market that other people are doing.
Just the fact that we could mean different things when we say right to market, I think is really an important place to start when we're deconstructing this, especially because as you referenced the last episode, I was very specifically talking about you should not write to market. Not everyone is going to be excellent at these 7 skills. And because of the level of excellence that other people have when they are really, really great at those skills, then us trying to do those things is not our genius. And that's essentially what I was saying is like everyone is capable if and this is kind of my baseline. If you write a book that sells, you have written a book that is to market. Some people do that intentionally, and some people do it intuitively, and some people do it in a combination of intentionally and intuitively. But it is possible for everyone to write a book that meets a market demand without intentionally looking at the market, researching the market, studying the market, understanding all these variables and prioritizing the skills that I talked about in the last episode. And in particular, Nat, when we talked about market awareness as a neighborhood, there was this sense of like when I sit in my neighborhood, I'm not always out on the street walking around asking people what they're doing. I'm not necessarily on Zillow all the time looking at what the housing prices are like, right? Like there are only certain times in my maybe experience in my neighborhood that I'm doing that. A lot of the time, I'm just sitting in my house doing the things that I do, still existing in the
Yeah,
neighborhood that I live in. And I
yeah,
think this
yeah,
is the piece of and kind of your assertion, which I agree with, is that everyone has a presence in the market and a relationship to the market, regardless of whether we intend to do anything intentional. And maybe my best work is just making tea in my house and not trying to do anything intentional about vigilance so I think our
yeah.
level of vigilance needs to be different if we are not in that seven skill.
Yeah, that's a good vigilance is a good way of putting it, Becca, because I think we all, as authors, we all have a relationship with our neighborhood, the specific part of the market that we inhabit, and we have a relationship with the readers and authors who hang out in that neighborhood. But that relationship will be different for different people and at different phases in our careers as well, right? There might well be a situation where we're very plugged into what people are doing and we are communicating in reader spaces and stuff like that. But just because that is happening for one person at one time in their career doesn't mean that everyone at all times in their career, even if they're in the same genre, has to do those things. And I think a big part of what you have been saying in the past with QTPing, the idea of writing to market, is pushing back against the idea that everyone needs to craft their stories based on what's already going on in the market. As you've said,
Yeah.
some people do at some times, but not everyone does. And there are other reasons and other ways to be aware of the market than taking your stories from the market, if you see what I mean. I know
Yeah.
one of the things that we talked about when we were prepping for this episode, Becca, was the question of what do you feel if you go out into your neighborhood and you see people writing books that you like? If someone's out there writing a good book and you know it's good and it's popular, how does that make you feel? Is that a positive, energizing experience for you because you think, wow, what a cool book. Readers are going to love this.
Look at what's possible,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, look at what's possible. This person's doing this awesome stuff. Readers are going to love this. They're going to want more stuff. It's good for me. Or do you not see it as a positive thing? And I'm not saying that you have to see it as a positive thing. You might find it threatening or upsetting because it might make you feel like you can't live up to this level of writing or something. Or you might not want to interact with it at all because you might feel that it might negatively affect your own creativity. Those are all valid feelings. And the question of which one of those feelings you have is going to be different for different people.
The level of vigilance, I think, is really the key phrase that I want people to understand, especially not everyone, vigilance isn't going to serve everyone at all in the process of writing. So some of us need to be almost unvigilant during the process of writing or the process of story creation. And I can hear people being like, "Well, but Becca, which one am I? Like how do I know which one I am?" And this is one of the things Nat and I actually talked about when we were prepping. If you have listened to the Quitcast in the past, you know we have to talk about the bad news. Like there is always some element of this isn't what I want to hear. And so I'm just going to warn everyone to get your cups out because we're going to damn it, Becca, in just a second. But there is no fast and easy way to do this. Like there is no formula that we can give you that says, well, if you're this, then you do that. And if you're this, then you do that. And if you're this, then you do that. And I think this is part of the reason we wanted to do this episode in the first place, is to remind everybody that you are not doing it wrong by not knowing how to relate yet.
Yeah.
Like one of the things, and we were talking a little bit about your tango background, and one of the things that you talked about, which I think is like, not everybody would understand this if you haven't been through recently the process of learning something new, but the learning curve that people go through, everybody's learning curve is different. Everyone's learning curve is different. So if I'm a teacher, there's one thing about me understanding that everyone's learning curve is different. Me being able to guide people through those learning curves is one thing. But me as a person, what are the skills that I need to have in order to go through my own learning curve effectively? And the thing people are not going to like about this is that it's patience. You have got to be willing to experiment with it and then take the data that you get from the experiment seriously. So, just to go back to something that Nat said, I just think this is so important. If it doesn't serve you, please stop doing it. Like, if it
Mm.
doesn't serve you to be in all these author groups looking at what everybody's doing in the market, if it's not helping you to write better books, for the love of God, stop, because it's not necessary for you to do that. And so the reason we had to do the original episode, QTPing You Should Write to Market, is that some of us need absolutely to say, please stop being hypervigilant about every single thing in the market, especially as you're writing, if it is not helping you to write more effectively and more calmly and more
Yeah.
securely, because it isn't just about being better, it's also about the process being easier on you. But also, we can't just not pay attention to the market if we're not selling, right? Like we can't just ignore it completely if we're not selling. And this is where the learning curve becomes important and also difficult, because we have got to be willing to ask the questions. Should I be paying more attention? At what point in my process should I be paying more attention? Should I be listening? How are the readers communicating? Does that make sense? Like that
Yeah.
feels like a big learning curve for me, for people.
Yeah, it does. And I think it's tough because, so two things. First, we've talked already, Becca, about the idea of marketing being a communication process in the sense that when you are making a book cover and when you're writing a blurb and even when you're writing advertising copy and those kinds of things, you are communicating to readers about your book. And you're communicating what kind of emotions they're going to feel, and you are fitting in, whether you're aware of it or not, you're fitting in with a set of norms. And those norms come from the other things that the readers are experiencing, the other books they're reading, but also the other media they're consuming and the rest of their life experience and stuff. So the marketing aspect and market awareness more generally is a communication process. And you're absolutely right, Becca. It's hard to know when to put time into that. Either when in terms of your writing process of an individual book, or when in your career. So if you're at one phase of your career, is that something you should be really spending a lot of time on, or is it something you should leave until later?
Yeah, I mean, I have opinions about that, obviously, having coached a lot of authors, and
Mhm.
I think a lot of us are too vigilant throughout the entire process
Yep.
rather than picking sort of a direction for a series that we're going to do and then committing to that direction and following through on the direction that we're going in. I think many of us are trying to be so conscious that we're on TikTok trying to figure out, do we like third act breakups right now or not? And then that's going to make me not write a third act breakup in a series where I've done 4 third act breakups that people are now expecting me to do
Yeah.
those. And I'm so convinced that that's the reason my book sales are not happening, that I'm like, well, let me just throw spaghetti at the wall. And again, I said learning curve. I do think learning curves are important. But here's the thing, if you are emotionally below the line when you are making the decision, that's not the right decision to make. So if you're on TikTok freaking out because everybody hates third act breakups right now, that is not the time to make a decision to not have a third act breakup in your book. You need to get regulated, get above the line, and make the decision when you've had some time to process it, to talk to other people, to look at the larger trends that exist and ask people if they are seeing differences in how their books are performing based on this, etc. And this for me is about why vigilance is a word that I want us to be conscious about, because so
Mm.
many of us are so vigilant and we are taking action on every single data piece that we come across instead of taking information in, making a decision, seeing that decision all the way through, and then seeing what happens because we're so terrified of not selling and we are not regulating about that terror and are instead just making decisions willy-nilly. And hopefully everybody knows this. If you don't, you will never know if that's working for you, if you change
Mm.
everything all the time and you never see things through. Like you won't know what the reasons are if you don't limit the variables. Anyway,
So social media, I mean, insert obligatory complaint about social media here that social media would have us believe that as authors we are driving a go-kart, and we are not. We are piloting a jumbo jet. It
yeah,
takes time for us to do anything, and pilots have a thing called chasing the needle, where if you take too many actions too quickly, then you end up quite literally chasing the needle. You're moving around, and you don't ever get time to understand the consequences of any individual action. And
yeah,
I think it's easy to say that, of course, and it's hard to do because, as you say, Becca, when you watch a TikTok or you see some YouTube video or something like that saying you must do this or you mustn't do that, it's hard to resist that. But I think consciousness about it is maybe the first step.
yeah. That's why my rule with people is always don't make dysregulated choices. Like when you feel that fear that you're doing it wrong, that's not the time to make the decision. And if you only take one rule away from this whole talk, it would be that one. Because the way that you make choices when you're feeling afraid of something is you're not acting on real data. And I've talked about this in previous episodes. I've actually talked about it in a couple of the character episodes. So if you watch the Spock episode, and I think if you watch, I'll find the other one. I'll put it in the show notes. But I know for sure I talk about this in the Spock episode. So I won't go into it in too much depth here. If you want to know more about it, go watch the second half of that episode where I talk about analytical. If you are consistently making decisions that you regret later because you wish that you had had more time to think about it, et cetera, you need to learn the skill of emotional regulation. Because if you're not capable of getting regulated again, like you're making decisions, you're calling names, yelling at someone, etc., or you're withdrawing and running away, etc., like the fight or flight mechanisms, right? Those are evidence that you are below the line. So when you're trying to make these forceful, urgent, very big stakes decisions when you are below the line, you're being too vigilant. So then the block in the skill chain that you're missing is emotional regulation. And what people don't want to hear, because they get so dysregulated about their sales, is they don't want to hear, you know what, the key to being a long-term career author is learning how to emotionally regulate, because they want it to be something like Facebook ads or direct sales or, tropes. And the reality is, if I could teach every single human being on the planet one thing, it would be how to regulate. Because so many of us are making dysregulated decisions and we think we're making regulated choices because logic, when you're below the line, sounds real rational, but it's not. Because when you get back above the line, you recognize how irrational you were being. And most of us just don't have the capacity to recognize when we're in those decisions. So, the way that I want us to think about this, about vigilance about the market, is if it's not helping you on a daily basis to write books more calmly and effectively and securely and creatively, not just better, again, because sometimes when we use the word better book, we start going looking for vigilance, like how do I make the book better?
Mm.
What's better in my genre? How do I and I start being scanning the horizon for danger. You're below the line. But I want the books to be produced in a way that increases my peace and security, not just in a way that makes more sales, because the way that makes more sales that is dysregulated is not sustainable. Anyway, I know that I got a little off track of where we were headed, but this was why I said buckle up, everybody, because who knows where we're going here. But I do think this is why the you're going to have to pay attention to the market on some level if you're not currently selling. So then we have to figure out, how do I have a sustainable relationship with the market, which is primarily about monitoring how vigilant it helps me to be. And so watching for how dysregulated I get is one of the skills that you can use increase to help you decide if you're doing it right or not.
You've made a really good point about the difficulty of deciding when to take action. And I think it's worth also noting that sometimes the best action to take is no action at all.
1,000%. This is what I mean about vigilance, though, right? So think
Yeah.
about how I exist in my house. I don't know what my neighbors are doing right now. Like, I'm doing something else. We're
Mhm.
recording, right? My neighbors could be out shoveling my yard. Their dog could be pooping on my grass. I have no idea. It happens around here. I'm just
I'm
saying.
sure.
Yeah. But my being vigilant about it right now would take my focus away from something that's more important for me to be doing right now. Because I'm regulated, I know that.
Yeah.
But if I was dysregulated and very uncomfortable, and I think this is the piece that people need to think about, when we react to every single piece of data, that's a signal that we're dysregulated. When we're hyper vigilant, that's a signal that we're dysregulated. So
Yeah.
many things that happen. In fact, this was one of the first conversations we had about the neighborhood, right? Was um for most of us, most of the stuff we see, we ignore. Because
Yeah.
so Nat does this newsletter that comes every week or every month. You get both of them, right? So as I was starting to get my first weeks and months of newsletters and I was collecting all this data, and we were having a conversation about what to listen to, I think in reference to a call that we were planning to do. And I made this comment about how, like, well, yeah, I get them. And I said, what do you do? And you said, I don't do anything with it anymore. Because at
Mm.
this point, I've seen so much of it that I know, and this was another conversation we had, why it can be really important to watch the data sometimes is that
Mm.
it doesn't change that much. Like the
No.
actual bigger
No.
picture trends. And that was why you had said, like, I don't pay attention to it very much anymore unless there's major changes or unless I'm looking for something very specific, specifically because you had looked at it enough to feel comfortable with this idea that it doesn't change. And while not everyone has 4 years to wait, you can also listen to Nat, who can tell you it
Yeah. Yeah.
just doesn't
Absolutely.
change that much, right?
The difficult, another one of those things that is maybe hard to believe for people is most markets are not as trendy as we think they are. Popular
Yeah.
themes from a story crafting level, popular tropes, popular story elements tend to stay popular. Their
Yep.
specific manifestations and the details around them change. And that's why, in the concept of the neighborhood, that's why we talk about how details matter. The little things that are going on in your neighborhood matter more to you as an author than the bigger things that are going on across town. But it's okay to watch what's going on and then not take action. I think,
Yes.
Becca, though, if like when you were talking there, I was thinking a bit about how can we bring this back to practical advice for people,
Yeah.
knowing about when to take action and when not to. And that's a really difficult question. I'm not sure I should have asked it. But one thing that you've said, okay, so one thing is understand when you are dysregulated and try not to take action in those situations. Another thing I think we've sort of implied is don't try not to chase the needle. Try not to make decisions about things until you're pretty confident you've seen the consequences of the last decision you made. You know, in an
Yes.
experiment, ideally, we would only change one thing at a time. In practice, when we're doing stuff in when we're putting out a new book, we can't always do that. You know, but it helps, I think, to keep notes about what we've done, or try and remember what it is we've done, and also why we did it and what we thought would happen. In a way, I'm not really talking about making a huge amount of notes or being particularly um, careful about it, but it's easy for us to forget, I think, when our emotions are bound up in how well a book does,
Yeah.
because of course they are. It's easy for us to forget why we chose to do particular things, why we chose to change our covers, or why we rewrote our blurbs, or those kinds of things, you know?
Yeah. And you bring up an interesting point too, that
Mhm.
the difference between paying attention to the market for writing and paying
Yeah.
attention to the market for marketing. Because one of the things we talked about also very early, and I think this may have been when I was actually in New Zealand for the conference, which was this was not meant to be a writing tool,
Mm,
Kindletrends.
mm,
It
mm.
was not meant to be an aid in how to write to market. There are going to be people who use it as an aid for how to figure out how to write to market, especially the infographics, I think, are especially helpful for that because it helps you
Yep.
to collect data in a very, very uh, narrow way. And I'll put some links in the show notes so people can see what those look like. But the actual like weekly and monthly newsletters and the infographics, the data themselves was a marketing tool more so than any kind of writing tool at all. And this is where we get into the if we're going to QTP, you should not write to market. Then if we're using write to market as making a package of a book, like
Mm.
the whole book is the because if people hear you shouldn't write to market, they're going to think I don't have to pay attention to the market at all, ever, no matter what. But that's not what we're saying, right?
Yeah.
Like when we say don't write to market, we're
Yeah.
not
Yeah. The
saying
market is where
never
your
mind, you don't have
readers
to pay
live.
attention ever. Yeah.
Yeah. The market is where your readers live to some degree,
Yeah.
because they are a big chunk of what makes it up. And so understanding where they live in a metaphorical sense and what they are consuming is important. As always, we've got to, as you say, we've got to be regulated about these things. And sometimes readers can lay unreasonable expectations on us. Or they can say that they will want something and then not buy it. You know, those things are certainly possible. But understanding, for me, I think, you know, and we were talking about this earlier. I'm beginning to see this as being a communication job. So when I am talking about writing my blurbs and commissioning covers, I think about that as a job of trying to get across to my readers what it is they're going to get if they buy my book. What emotions and experiences are they going to have if they plunk down their cash and they read my book? They give up their time and money to me. And I think maybe that is a healthy way to look at it, is that I'm not fitting into rules. I'm not doing stuff because I think it's going to guarantee success, because I don't think either of those things are the right way to think about it. I think that what I'm trying to do is to communicate to my readers what experiences they're going to have if they buy my book. So I need to be in the places that they are, and I need to understand what their language is, what their symbolic language of covers is, what words mean in blurbs, and all of those kinds of things. There's still room for me to put my own stamp on it. There always will be, but I also want to communicate in a way that resonates with my audience, so the people who are going to enjoy my book see it and go, yeah, this is a book that I want to read.
Right. Because there's already a book-shaped hole in the market in terms of like if I'm writing cozy fantasy, there's already a cozy fantasy shaped hole there that readers understand certain things about what that looks like and what kind of words that people use and that type of thing. So if we're saying don't pay attention to the market at all, while some of you, and there is a portion of people who can do this, some of you are naturally so resonant with your avatar, with the people that you're writing for, that you will just naturally use those words and naturally want to make your covers look that way without having to ever look at the market to do it. Again, if you end up not selling, though, so this is the question where we have to keep coming back to the learning curve, which is if I am that intuitive, I do want to go ahead and make the decisions intuitively on my own. But the test is if I release the book, how is it doing? But again, because of the saturation in the market, we can't always promise that a lack of sales is about any particular mistake that I made in my packaging. So I do still think that you may get a communication from a reader or a group of readers or from the market and choose to ignore it. And here's the difference. This is why the younger you are in the arc of your learning, the earlier you are, let's say, in the arc of your learning curve, the less you have the benefit of the veteran perspective, right?
Mm.
And if you do not, if I have a client who's a friend of mine who once said, if I knew how many one-star reviews it would take to make $1 million, I would have wanted them to come so much faster than they did,
Yeah.
which is a veteran perspective, right? Because when you have someone who has seen it all, they have a very different expectation of what that data means. And this is why I said some of us need more patience because we're too early in our learning curve to understand what data points you have to pay attention to and what you don't have to pay attention to. And if you have someone who's helping you with your marketing and you show them your cover and they say, hey, that looks great, and then you release it and it doesn't sell, was the cover actually not to market, or were there other factors? We don't necessarily know from sales alone. You may need
No.
more data than that. But again, that's a perspective that you may not have yet if you're not a veteran. So there's too many decisions that we might be making early in the learning curve that are happening primarily because we don't have enough context for the decisions yet. And again, the bad news is we can't make the learning curve move any faster than it does. And in order to get through the learning curve, we have to write books, release them, take a chance on whether they're going to sell or not, potentially invest some money into their discoverability. Although, if you've seen the business phases, please God, don't invest very much because you don't know if you're going to get it back yet when you're in research and development phase. So it's not a promise that if you spend $1,000 marketing something, you're going to make $1,000 plus back. But again, this is all stuff that you learn going through the learning curve. So what I'm trying to say on some level is we need you to have varying levels of vigilance. Hopefully we can provide some um, guidance, and hopefully we have about how to do that. Ignoring the market is not always helpful unless you have a high level of overlap with your avatar. And specifically when sales are not happening, you may need more experience before you can really be a valid evaluator of how your sales have gone. We can't just take one data point on its own as an assumption of like, well, I must need to change my covers. I must need to, et cetera, et cetera. So that there is really just some experience that is required in, again, the curve to understand.
I think it's, yeah, absolutely. I think
Right.
it's with, this is maybe a little bit of a departure, but one of the things that I often talk about in my teaching is for when testing things, instead of producing one version of something, so one blurb or one cover, produce three, not two, but three. And there can be one that you put a lot of effort into and two cruddy ones, it doesn't matter. And I've had much better results asking people to rank them in order of whether they like them or any, which one they think will sell or whatever, rather than just giving somebody one thing and asking them to evaluate it. The reason for this is, there's a couple of reasons, but the most relevant one here, I think, is that if you can do this for a few different people, then you start collecting some data about what in science we call variance. That is, how much we talk about accuracy and precision quite a lot, but variance is a really important thing too as well. How different are different people? And they might have very low variance on a particular thing, or they might have quite high variance on a particular thing. And the reason why I think this is important, Becca, is because the example that you were saying before, where you do something as best you can and you don't get sales. Was it because you made the wrong decisions? And you don't know. That's very true, because a lot of things in the market have quite high variance. And it's only once we have released a bunch of books and we have a more veteran perspective, as you put it, that we start to get a picture of that variance and how much things go up and down, you know? When I'm saying this, I don't. I'm really trying not to be negative for your viewers and listeners. I'm not saying necessarily that it's going to be horrible for years and there's nothing you can do but to stick it out. Patience is important, and it does take a long time before you get a sense of what's going on in your neighborhood. But I think our other premise is that this is a non-random process. You know, we talked about two really basic premises before. First, most authors want readers to read their books and enjoy them, right? Second, that this is a non-random process, that we can get better at putting our books in the hands of readers who will enjoy them. And the way we do that is by practice and awareness. But as you've said, we need to have a sustainable career, which means not being hyper vigilant about the decisions we take.
Yeah. So if you think about practice and awareness as two sort of separate skill chains, let's say, that you may need to get better at, in terms of, I may need to get better at a discrete skill like blurb writing, or a discrete skill like um, cover evaluation or something like that, right? There are places to go to be taught that, for sure. And also, I want to put in a plug for the fact that when you are not great at something, like if you're not great at understanding covers, a rudimentary or perfunctory level may be important, but on some level, you're only going to be able to be better at it when you have released more books with more covers. Like there, if you can't find a discrete place, like somebody who's going to just teach me about the elements of covers and what they mean. If I can't find a discrete place to get better at blurbs, or to get better at reading my sales data, or to get better, I feel sometimes like that practice, right? That skill of practice, I can't downplay the fact that I may have to survive a long time
Mm,
in the industry. And I think and the piece that I see getting in people's way is this thought that we're going to miss out on something if we don't have success right the hell now. And I think that danger zone there is what keeps an awful lot of us from allowing ourselves to go through the learning curve or the research and development phase in terms of the five business phases of an author career. We resist allowing ourselves to learn because we think that we are going to miss out on some kind of big pot of money if we don't learn this quickly, and very specifically if we don't have a high level of competence at some of this stuff very, very fast. So that's typically when we make very, again, below the line, very rushed decisions about like, well, I'm going to recover my entire series because clearly it's the covers that aren't working. When sometimes the answer is, how about we wait and see what happens with the next series? And then people say, but I need to make money right now. So many of us need that reminder of like, the stakes are too high for me. If I can't even fathom the idea of allowing myself to go through the learning curve, the stakes are too high. I have created a situation where I'm not allowed to fail. And that is not going to serve anybody in this industry. Because when I create situations where I'm not allowed to fail, every single action that I take makes way too, like, it's life and death situation, right? Because now I feel like my entire life is in danger. And I just want to say there are other ways to create security in your life that are not this dangerous, right? That are not this, what's the word I'm looking for? not dangerous, unpredictable, that are not this unpredictable. And if it's predictable that you need, switch jobs, get a new job. Like if we create these high stakes where I'm not allowed to fail and learn, it's not going to serve us in the end. And I think that was the piece for me about practice that is so important is if we don't allow ourselves the learning curve, we can't learn.
It's hard, though, emotionally, for authors when they have had a certain level of success, and this is something we've talked about, but then they find that what they have been doing in the past is no longer bringing them the same level of success. And so a lot of their well-being, either their actual physical well-being and or their mental health, is tied up in achieving at a certain level, selling a certain amount. Do
Yep.
you have any advice or thoughts about that? Because I know you and I have talked about this before in light of the stuff we're talking about here.
Yeah, it depends on where it's coming from in terms of like, it depends on whether the need for an increased amount of sales is coming from, let's say, like I have to pay my mortgage because that kind of those state life and death stakes change the game a little bit. And then it becomes
Mm,
harder to parse through that without like actually talking to the individual person. But if it's coming from a couple of motivational places, like if you're high achiever, just as a for instance, the I reset the bar at zero every time I achieve something, and every single time I make a higher level, I assume that I must have to get higher than that every single time. The
yeah.
problem with that is in author business phase language, once you hit a phase five business, you stop doing the 1x, 2x, 3x income, right? So you'll eventually hit a spot in your author income where you will stop making 100% over what you made the year before. And you'll
Mm,
start making 10%, 5%, 1%, sometimes negative 10% what you did the year before. And none of that is a danger zone. Because if
mm,
you're in a mature business, a phase five business, you should actually reach a point where you hit a ceiling in your ability to make money unless you change the game completely. And changing the game completely puts at risk everything that you bought. Everything that you bought with your blood, sweat, and tears in the past. So
yeah.
when you have that personality trait where you are going to reset the bar every single time you have success, you may end up inadvertently destroying this amazing thing that you built because this expectation is an unrealistic expectation that I feel like I should be able to make seven figures because other people are making seven figures, for instance. So I reset the bar when I hit $500,000. And now I think I have to make 1 million next year because I've been making 100 and then 200 and then 400 and then, you
Mm,
know what I mean?
mm. Yeah, yeah.
So if
And
it's
yeah.
oh, sorry.
No, I was just about to sort of observe, yeah, the thing where you never allow yourself to actually enjoy any achievement because the minute it becomes apparent that you're going to achieve it, it's automatically priced in. And so you stop thinking about it and start looking at the next thing beyond it. Yeah, it sounds vaguely familiar, actually.
Right, which if it's coming from a strength like futuristic, as a for instance, futuristic people don't feel their achievement in the moment because they've already felt it. So like I'm high in futuristic. When I know that something is going to happen, I've already experienced that moment 6 months ago. So when it finally happens, it's not that I'm not happy it's happening. It's that I've literally experienced it already. So now I'm thinking about the next achievement, not because I don't take this one seriously, but because I already had that moment. And so the only reason for me to experience that moment again is if there are people who are close to me who really feel like I need to experience it with them. And then in that case, okay, I'll come back from the future and experience the past, and that'll be great. But also, so that's what I mean. Like, it depends on where it's coming from. Because when achievers reset the bar, essentially what they're doing is saying, it's not okay if I don't achieve more than I did before. But the question is, isn't it though? Because at some
Mm,
point, you stop reaching the place where there's any more 100% better to get.
yeah, it's
And if
marginal
you're,
gains from then on.
yep,
Yeah.
marginal gains. And not just that, but like on some level, when you hit that mature business phase, you should go minus for a year because it means that the market is fluxing and you're fluxing with it. You should maybe, if other things outside of yourself have impacted you, it doesn't say anything about you that your income has gone down. That's about the market, right? So this ability to be able to separate from the success or the failure and to have some kind of perspective about it. If there's something that's intensely driving me from the inside, it becomes harder and harder for me to do that. So then the question is, if there is something in particular that needs to be satisfied in order for me to feel like I can release that. And this is why talking about sales is so important with authors, because what drives us internally to have the sales need to be happening, if it's coming from a beneficial place, like what I described about the futuristic, I'm not going to try to change somebody who's experiencing intense, amazing joy, wonderful things, just happens to be 3 months before everybody else experiences it. That's fine. But I am going to have a question if they're not ever experiencing that level of excitement about what they're potentially accomplishing, because that says something to me about an inner state that we probably need to talk about. And that's a different question. If you're experiencing an extreme amount of fear that you're never going to reach a point where it's enough, then that's an inner state that we've got to talk about. And again, I think this is part of why this this channel isn't just a strategies and tactics channel, because not only do the correct strategies and tactics change for each person and what they need to be doing, but the thing that's the keystone for you getting to feel the thing that you're here to feel, the thing that you long to feel, that you want.
Catalyst.
Yeah, like it's the whatever it is for you as an individual.
Mm.
If something is standing in the way of you feeling that because of the way that you're wired, then we need to fix that, because we want you to feel that thing. We want you to get to that experience. That's what you're here to feel. But if I can't get there because I have a fear that if I don't keep achieving, that I'm not going to be okay. I'm not going to be worthwhile. I'm not going to be important. I'm not going to be whatever the word is that I need to experience, then I got to deal with that, right? Because the market can't solve all problems. And again, I'm not, obviously, Nat's not suggesting that. I know that. And I'm definitely not suggesting that. But I think there are people in the world who believe that if I could just have enough success, like if I could just read the market correctly, if I could just find this silver bullet that's out there to get me the Rebecca Yaros level of success, that all my problems would be solved. And I want to say, oh, my sweet summer child, all your problems would just be beginning, right? Like yes, it would solve some issues, absolutely, but it's not gonna it's not gonna bring you what you're looking for, because the thing that you're looking for can't be accomplished by reaching a point of sales or reaching an amount of money or reaching a whatever. There's something
Well, you
else that's
talk,
going to give you
yeah,
that. Yeah,
yeah.
go ahead.
You talk quite a bit about how a lot of decisions in authoring are motivated or driven by fear, and that's quite a good way to put it, I guess. And a lot of what we're talking about here is trying to evolve a relationship with your market, with your neighborhood, which is healthy and energizing for you.
And
And that
secure.
means, yeah, that means a couple of things. It means knowing when to engage in it and when not to engage in it. But it also means knowing what to take from it and how to let what other people are doing influence your decisions, and the degree to which you should do so. The degree is
Yep.
always going to be somewhere in between totally and none at all.
And
It's always going to
zero.
be
Yeah.
it's going to be somewhere in the middle somewhere.
Yeah.
But as we have said before, you're not driving a go-kart, you're flying a jumbo jet.
Yep.
So what that means is that your choices take a long time and the ramifications of them take a long time to become apparent.
Yep.
So maybe this also comes down to resilience and the fact that you You don't want to keep on doing the same thing. Well, we're trying not to keep on repeating the mistakes of the past, and that's admirable. But on the other hand, we need resilience in order to understand that we are doing something two or three times, and at that point, if it's still not working, okay, maybe at that point it's reasonable to say, all right, we need to now change what we're doing.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is that second skill that you were talking about, right? Which the first one was sort of practice. And we need to talk about the skill of awareness because this is, in my opinion, understanding the relationship that is the best for you and the market is really important. And because, like, the neighborhood around you, there's a reason why that metaphor works so well. Like the neighborhood around you, I can't not live here. I have to live
Mm.
here. So I need to understand how much vigilance to have. And I think we talked a tiny bit about regulation as being an important part of it. And I want to talk just a little tiny bit about personality stuff to try to help some people have some big picture coordinates for themselves about where they might fit into things. And I'm going to use language that's not strengths related just because I think it's big picture enough that everybody should be able to understand this. But I'm going to use intuitive and non-intuitive, so concrete, just as a way of understanding this kind of continuum. The more heavily you fall on the side of the intuitive scale, where you would consider yourself to be an intuitive decision maker, intuition has three parts. Interestingly, speaking of jumbo jets, the way I always describe it is an autopilot system. So it has sensors, it has data maps, and it has uh, vigilance, which is the person who's sitting behind the cockpit, right? Every single intuitive person is taking in information constantly at supersonic speeds. And they're forming, just like an autopilot system on a jet, all of the different pressures of the air and everything that's coming at it is making some kind of an impact on the data maps that you are creating. And the way that you set your data maps internally is built by the way that you're taking in information. And I think a lot of people who are highly intuitive feel like I should be more conscious. I should be more conscious. And you should not be more conscious. There is a high level of data that you're already taking in that you are already processing. And where you want your consciousness to come in is when you're either you don't know what the answer is, like you can't trust your intuition, and then you want to have places where you can go to look at the data. And I use the um, um, example of your infographics a lot because the infographics have this cover montage where you can select different segments to look at. Like I could go onto the cozy fantasy and say, I only want to look at the bakery baked goods, cozy
Mm.
fantasies. And I want to look at what all their covers are doing, right? So I have the ability because Nat's created something that has a lot of veracity. The tool has a lot of veracity to be able to look just at what I want to look at, narrow the sample size. And that's something for intuitive people that is really important. Narrowing the sample size is so
Yeah.
important. You only
Yeah,
want
very
to look
much.
at the stuff that's relevant for you.
Yeah.
The more concrete you are, the more fun it is for you to look at huge amounts of stuff and be able to look for patterns and try to understand and analyze,
Yeah.
etc. So the less you are on that scale, the more you want to be narrowed in what you're looking for. And you may need to look for help from someone. This is the other piece that I think is so important. So often, when we can't do something, like if I don't know how to analyze data, I don't realize that there's a small skill that I could be practicing that would help me get slightly better at that. And this is why I said for intuitives, narrowing is important. Because if you go
Yeah.
and look at the whole Kindle store and you're highly intuitive, you don't know what to pay attention to and what not to in a conscious, concrete way. But if
Mm.
you go and look at the infographics, you can narrow down into just what you want to look at. And then all you're looking at is just the relevant data. And granted, this can still help everybody on every part of the continuum. But the people I see that struggle with this the most are the intuitive people who are like, I can't analyze anything. And I'm like, but if I give you just a set of covers only with bakery, cozy fantasy stuff, you
Mm,
probably will have an easier time picking out the things that are common between those covers, even
yeah.
if they're not 100% relevant.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That some people will benefit from a more conscious exposure to things that are happening in the market, and some people will benefit from a less conscious exposure. But for the people who are in the latter category, it's important that they are limiting what it is they're trying to take in at any point. Because if it's confusing for you, then it might be confusing because you're trying to drink the whole ocean in one go, and
Yeah,
instead, what you need to be doing is taking small sips, just looking at the stuff which is really important. And also, in some cases, not trying to um, get anything specific out of it. One of the things that I sometimes tell people to
right.
do with Kindletrends is just look at the pictures. Like see where things come in,
See if
and
you
just
notice anything.
yeah, look at what's coming past each week. Don't try and make any decisions or anything like that. Just get used to seeing the rhythms of things, the ebbs and flows, and then after a little while, you may get a sense of something. You may see something and you think, oh, that's not what I'd expected. That feels different. And then once you've had that intuition, then you might be able to track back and go and look at why you're feeling that way, or you can examine it and saying, okay, what's driving that? But that only works if you allow yourself to let go of the idea that everything has to mean something all the time. And it
Yes.
kind of doesn't, right?
Yeah.
You will see variance. And this comes back to the thing we were saying before. You'll see variance in a lot of things because different authors will make different decisions. And those decisions may be equally effective. So different authors will come up with different ways of signifying a particular thing in covers, and those decisions might be equally effective in terms of sales, and that's okay. So it's worth being able to look at everything, but then saying, okay, the things I'm going to care about are only these things.
Yep. Yeah, this is the perspective of experience thing as well, right? Like, I think some of the reason, and we're probably going to end up doing more content about this in the future, just because it feels like there's some skill chains that are similar enough to the original video that we did, right? Where there's like the 7 skills of writing to market, that
Mm-hmm.
I feel like we probably could do a similar video for things like how to practice getting better at writing, at understanding the market, how to practice getting better
Mm.
at, uh, analyzing data and things like that. But the thing that you don't know, if you don't have a high level of familiarity with how to analyze data, is you don't know what he just said is true. You have to know you can't take action on every single piece of data. But so many of us, when we look at the Kindle store, and again, this is what I mean about those small skills. Sometimes you really need the benefit of experience and not just your own experience, but someone who's an expert at doing something to tell you, like what my friend said about the 1-star reviews. It's okay not to pay attention to the 1-star reviews. You want 1-star reviews. They're good for your books, they mean they're being widely read. If you're a
Yeah.
brand new baby author, you don't know that. 1-star reviews seem like the end of the world because if I get a 1-star review that says something, capital S, about my book, it doesn't say anything about your book except somebody had bad shrimp yesterday. Like most of the time. It's not that there aren't 1-star reviews that actually are helpful, but generally speaking, they're just reader opinions. But you don't know that yet if you don't have the benefit of experience, right? That better in perspective. But so clearly we're going to have to do more content about this in the future. Hopefully this has been helpful. I'm sure it has because already I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot that. I need to remember to do that too. but but I want to say thank you so much to Nat for being here. It was, as always, helpful. I appreciate that. So thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you, Becca. It was a real pleasure, and I hope this has been valuable to everybody watching and listening as well.
Yeah, we have some videos on the Patreon that we did, and I will link to those as well because the ones that we did on the Patreon in January are free. So you're welcome to watch them if you'd like to. They're about the archetypes, about the right to market archetypes. And we use the infographics from Kindletrends. And I think we did some newsletter stuff too. Like I think I
Yeah,
showed
we
everybody.
did.
Oh, yeah. I showed
Yeah, we
everybody my
did.
spreadsheets.
Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, we did a little bit. And I mean, I'd like on that subject actually, I would really like to work with you on broadening some of the stuff that I have taught about how to relate cover elements to blurbs to content. So in my
Yeah.
teaching, I have a thing which I work people through using Kindletrends about looking at what's going on in a story and identifying story elements, and then backing out to the blurb and understanding how those story elements are related to what's in the book, and then backing out further to the cover and stuff. But I realize now from talking to you, Becca, that there are a lot of different ways that people might do this depending on their archetypes and depending on their skills. So I think there are ways that we could generalize that and make it more useful to a broader range of people.
Yeah, we have so much to talk about the market awareness concept and the neighborhood and just kind of everything. So let's just say we're obviously going to have Nat back and we will talk again in the future about more of this. And my guess is doing some skill illustrations because it feels a little bit like the ability to see those skill gaps is something that's very frustrating if you can't see them yourself. So I will make a commitment to do what we can do to try to help bridge some of those skill gaps. And if
Yeah,
you have questions about them, please ask in the comments. Because often, if you'll describe to me what it is that's happening, I can say, okay, especially if you can tell me your strengths, by the way, because it really helps if I know what your strengths are. But if you give me enough context, I can say, okay, how about try this first and see what happens and come back and tell me what happens. And I like to have those conversations in the comments. And very few people ever take me up on it because they don't think that I'm serious. But I really do like to have those conversations with people. So please feel free to comment. And then we will obviously have Nat back again in the future to talk more about the last thing on earth that I ever thought I would want to talk more about, which is writing to market. Who knew that I was going to start making so much content about writing to market? Well, when it's needed, I guess. But
yeah, and good presenters, yeah, good presenters and good thinkers can make anything valuable and interesting. That's the thing I always say, that
I hope so.
if you get deep enough into something and you ask enough of the right questions, then there's always something valuable in there somewhere.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Well, thank you so much again. And thank you to everybody who was here watching. I will see you on the next Quickcast. Bye, everybody.